President Obama meets with top U.S. leaders in D.C. to discuss the growing crisis, and that's what it is in Iraq. This all as ISIS militants storm through Iraq, bringing deadly violence to yet another city, attacking the country's largest oil refinery. Did Vice President Joe Biden actually get this thing right back in 2006 when he said Iraq ought to be divided into 3 regions? Plus, tonight, our legal panel weighs in on what was called the trial of the century. Of course, I'm talking about the O.J. Simpson case 20 years later, from cameras in the courtroom to the attorneys who became overnight celebrities. Look at how the case had an impact that we still feel on the American justice system. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, tonight, we will begin in Iraq, where Iraqi security forces have been working to try to end or at least stem the deadly advance by ISIS, the group of Sunni extremists here, militants, that continue to wreak havoc here for now the better part of a week. ISIS has swept through the country's northern region, carrying out deadly assaults in cities like Tal Afar, Mosul, Baiji, and Tikrit. The fast-moving insurgency is pushing all the way towards, yes, the capital city of Baghdad. Now, you have displaced residents in Tal Afar, and they've been piling into flatbed trucks today to flee following attacks on the town by those Sunni militia. India's foreign ministry is reporting that 40 of its citizens who were working at a Turkish construction company were kidnapped in Iraq near Mosul, and India today sending a senior diplomat to the country to try to find their whereabouts. The U.S. has itself sent now nearly 300 troops, including special forces, to assist in the conflict. However, the White House, they have ruled out at this point sending in ground troops. President Obama continues to deliberate what steps, if any, he'll take to help stabilize Iraq. And today, he met with bipartisan congressional leaders at the White House.
Military action is a component of the options the president is considering.
Senior administration officials tell ABC News that right now, it seems President Obama is unlikely to order a large-scale air offensive against military targets in Iraq. If there are airstrikes, they would be very limited, more like the targeted drone strikes the U.S. has used in both Yemen and Pakistan. The leading option, that is sending a small contingent of special operation forces to advise and train the Iraqi army. Critics of the administration, they are growing louder, including many familiar faces from the Bush administration. In an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, former Vice President Dick Cheney wrote, "Rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many." The White House fired back.
Which president was he talking about?
On Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Hagel said it wasn't the U.S. that lost anything in Iraq.
We have done everything we could to help them, but it's up to the Iraqis. They wanted to manage and govern their own country.
One U.S. official told ABC News that it's clear that the extremist Sunni ISIS fighters have momentum on their side. This video allegedly shows a fire at a refinery in Baiji after it was attacked by the Sunni Muslim extremists. The refinery accounts for about a quarter of Iraq's refining capacity. All right, so tonight we're going to break up this discussion into 2 parts. One, about a snapshot here of what's going on, not just in Iraq, but in the broader region and the global context. And then we're going to be talking about, in the second portion of this, what, if anything, the U.S. can or even should do about this. What is our role, both self-interest and otherwise there, and practically, where should the concerns be of we, the people of America, as it relates to a half a world away? And will the problems there stay a half a world away? All right, let's bring in our panel tonight. I'm joined by my friends here, Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, of course, and Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. And again, we'll talk the politics of this. I thought it was curious, and I'm being polite, what Dick Cheney had to say today, but also the maneuver. You have to try to even imagine the chutzpah to try that. But anyway, then you talk about the competing interests in Washington, and then really in world capitals around the globe here, where people realize it's not, it's not like Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What's happening in Iraq right now will not be confined to that nation's borders. Interesting, some of the comments I've seen and read, in that the concern is, if Biden was right, and this thing's going to break into 3 different parts, and the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds have it, it's not so neat like you redraw the map. the oil principally is going to be up in the north. You think they're going to let the Kurds have that? No way. All of a sudden, the Sunni extremists, they're going to have a launching point right now if they want to basically have attacks into different parts of the world right there. Not just, in obviously in Iraq, but Western Europe and even the United States. This will be terrorist breeding ground right now. But then you have all the interested parties. You've got Iran, you've got Turkey, you've got Syria, and...
But you touched on two of the things that I think are the main compelling reasons that America would get involved. And it's self-interest at this point. Only if this thing touches us, I think, are we even likely to get involved. One is the likely breeding ground for terrorist activities. And is that something that you need to take preventive measures against to stop ISIS from gaining control so they have that territory? Or is that something that you can do after the fact? If ISIS is encamped and you think that they're up to no good and could harm American interests, then you go in with drone attacks and bomb them. So that's one question. The other one is the oil. If this starts impacting the oil market and the price goes up at the pump here at home, that's going to lead to a whole bunch of other scenarios where people are going to press for involvement. But I'm not so sure that I see enough causation short of those two reasons for America to get back involved, especially considering how unpopular the prospect would be back
It is unpopular, Dominic. You don't hear anybody here clamoring, we've got to get in on maybe a few of the old hawks.
I don't think you will.
But what I saw from when we ended the show last night to when we're going on the air tonight is the amount of folks who sat down with the folks who really know the Middle East. I'm talking the intelligence folks and the rest who say, you don't get it. This isn't about Iraq having some fight anymore. There's a reason why the U.S. is talking to Iran. It's not all of a sudden we like the folks in Tehran right now. We got self-interest. We can't have this thing blow up. You think the Israelis are sitting back with their feet up saying, oh, let's turn on Al Jazeera and see what's going on in Iraq right now? Everybody is worried about the tinderbox. And I'm talking, Andrew, Syria, what's going on there? You want to talk to Turkey? You want to talk Saudi Arabia?
But the Israelis have the same question that we should be having right now, which is what exactly is the effect of any action that we take? You can bomb ISIS at this point, but if that just brings the balance back into the favor of the Maliki government, is that really doing you any favors in the long run? Does that really clean up the situation, or does it just slow down ISIS? It's exactly what the impact is and what the follow-up is to any action has to be considered. Is it does this somehow strengthen Assad in Syria? Does it strengthen Iran? Is that bad enough that you don't take any? I mean, all of these dominoes that you then have to press over.
That's the word.
Right.
That's the word, exact word I was going to use. It's a highly volatile situation. It didn't start today. It didn't start yesterday. It didn't start with Obama. It didn't start before President Bush. Highly volatile situation in the Middle East, as you've been pointing out, and it's always going to be that way, frankly. And I say this as someone who's been to Israel 3 or 4 times, and to be there as you have, you get to see just how volatile it is with the country, with the bordering countries, and something can go wrong at any minute. I agree with Andrew 1,000% because it's a domino effect, Richard. It really is. And I think that's why you're focusing on this, because you have U.S. interests that are involved. You have an appetite where there's no appetite here in the U.S. for any involvement with war, especially in that region.
I have a question for both of you, which is our role in the war starting in 2002 and the U.S. presence that toppled the Hussein government that left this vacuum. Is that a compelling enough reason for us to have an interest in this beyond any of those other reasons?
Not for me. I do understand why some believe that, hey, listen, the amount of thousands of American lives, more than $1 trillion that have been laid out by the American taxpayer here, and all the other multiples we all know about, sacrifice for what? That to me
isn't break it.
Right. To me is not compelling reason enough that you got to go back in to salvage it. I'm thinking you look at every track of history. When there were moments that people look back and say, listen, I don't want to admit this, they might be right. Maybe we shouldn't have withdrawn the troops like we did. Not that Iraq deserved us being there. It's certainly not the Maliki government. I got no loyalty to them. But look what's happened to this point. And I was all for the troop withdrawal. There's no easy answers here. There's no good answers.
Well, but let me ask you a question. So if you leave the troops, when do you bring them home? And
excellent question.
And what eventually they would have to leave. And wouldn't the same exact scenario play out at that point?
Here is, for me, an interesting thing. Where you say Maliki all of a sudden is our best friend saying, I'm begging you guys come back. Now, obviously they're smart enough to think about this in Washington. But as conditions for any help that we would do, even if it's drone strikes, even if it's putting guys to, to even arm some of the, the Shias up north, would be you're out. And the whole idea was that you were going to have a multi-ethnic, in effect, government here. What happened? Maliki gets in, he screws the Sunnis and sends them off to the side. And the inevitable or predictable would have happened, which has. So I don't think there's a clean way to put this whole thing back together. But the idea that we say, hey, it breaks into 3 parts, it is so myopic in that this thing won't end in Iraq. It's going to get much bigger. And there's going to be inevitably where we're going to have to go back in. I don't want to go back in. The American public doesn't want to go back in. So then the question becomes, is our best move now, or can we afford to wait when most people who I respect say this is going to get so much worse before it gets better because this won't stay in Iraq? I mean, again, you think the U.S. government wants to be negotiating with Iran if they didn't think this thing was going to be as bad as it is? I just have, and again, and I defer to people who've forgotten more on this than I, uniformly people say this thing has the potential here to be worse than anything since before 1970. And that, I don't know about you, that's a scary kind of I guess, statement as to where we are.
Well, here's my other concern with it. If we get pulled back in, it's going to be piecemeal. It's going to be little bit by little bit by
We're not
little
putting
bit.
troops back on the ground. I
But
don't think
but
we
first,
are, yeah.
first it's 300 guys in to protect the embassy, and then it's a few more to help protect. I mean, if we wind up with an expanded role, it's going to be drip by drip by drip by drip. That feels a lot more like Vietnam than it does either of the 2 wars in
Again,
Iraq.
both you guys are right, and I feel, like what I'm arguing for something I don't want. I wanted us to get the hell out of here, and I resent the Bush administration for how we got into this, and God knows we're going to talk about in a few minutes what they had to say about, their take or their alternate reality in terms of how we got there and what we could have done. That all said, I think history's going to look back to say, and nobody at this table, including me, thought we should have, maybe as they were advancing from the south and they were moving up north, maybe that was the time to use military strikes when you could identify them. Now they're so commingled, the idea that you can do these tactical strikes and take them out is a lot more problematic. I don't know. We're doing this all on the fly, but to pretend that it's not our problem anymore and wash our hands, that is delusional because it's going to come back here. Okay, and again, anybody pretending to have the answers, I'd love to hear it, although I don't think there's a person walking around who knows how this thing's going to play out or even what we ought to do. Okay, but I will tell you that tomorrow at 6 p.m., we're going to be joined here by experts on fronts here, from the military perspective here, a terrific analyst we'll have on, and also an expert as it relates to the region on what is a growing crisis. And I wouldn't say any more in Iraq, but I would say fast approaching the Middle East. All right, when we come back, Dom and Andrew and myself here are going to talk about the political aspect stateside here. What play does the president have, and where does Cheney and Wolfowitz and friends get off saying this is this president's fault here? We'll have more on that after this.